Alright, little guys and gals, strap yourself in for this one as I go to explain the greatest story ever told. The story opens with Odysseus, who is disguised as a beggar, his son, Telemachus, and the swineherd, Eumaeus, who all wake up at Eumaeus' house. After concocting a plan, Telemachus heads out back to his palace. When he arrives, everyone is so happy to see him that they start crying and hugging him. When Penelope asks if he has found Odysseus, he explains what his adventures were like in the Telemachy, this being the first 4 books that we read in class. But during his explanation, he doesn't reveal Odysseus' disguise or that he's even here in Ithaca. So as far as anyone knows, Odysseus isn't here. Or was he? The prophet Theoclymenus joined in by saying that in his prophecy, Odysseus was here in Ithaca and was gaining information and was plotting his revenge against the suitors. Now, of course, that's all very interesting and all yada 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 boring. I'll tell you what happens next. Brace yourself. Odysseus goes into town. It begins with Odysseus, who is still disguised, and Eumaeus walking into the town. There, they encounter an absolute dick called Melanthius, who is herding goats towards the palace to be slaughtered and eaten by the suitors. Oh no! Unprompted, Melanthius starts cussing out Odysseus for being poor, saying that Odysseus is a dirty pig and that he should go get a job. Maybe then he'll get some meat on his bony legs. Odysseus fantasizes about killing the man and getting him with the staff, or flipping him like an omelette and smashing his head to a pulp. However, before he could do anything, Eumaeus insults him back, saying that he isn't a good herder and the gods should strike him down. Melanthius, being insulted like the little baby he is, threatens the both of them, and he also says that he hopes that Telemachus gets shot down by Apollo's arrow inside of his palace, or that the suitors will crush him anyway, and that also that Odysseus just isn't coming back, so who cares. Melanthius left after that and went to go join the suitors in the palace. Now, personally, I hate the poor too, but I would never cuss one out on the street. I would just fund local governments to make more anti-homeless benches. Anywho, Odysseus and Eumaeus make their way to the front of the palace, and Odysseus begins to talk about how great his house looks. Fair enough, I guess. Odysseus and Eumaeus make a plan of how they're both going to get inside and get food, and Eumaeus plans to go first inside the palace. As they talk, a fun little dog called Argus, who Odysseus owned and bred himself, laid nearby. He sat there, laying on top of, or just by the manure of the cattle, waiting for his owner to finally come home. Feeling his presence, the best dog, Argus, starts wagging his tail, even though he is so old that he can't even walk over it. Argus is a great dog, because when Odysseus was away, many people used him to hunt, and he was great at hunting. But just as Argus finally sees his master, he dies of old age, after having lived for what have been 20 years? So far, this is making for a great story. All these insults and the deaths of beloved pets really get me excited for what's going to happen next. So, Telemachus invites Eumaeus inside to sit when he sees him enter the palace, and gives him something to eat. He tells Eumaeus to tell Odysseus to make the rounds of all the suitors and to ask them for food. Athena appears in front of Odysseus and says to go make the rounds now so she can distinguish the good from the bad, even though she's going to destroy them all anyway. Eumaeus tries to argue back, saying that Antinous isn't cool since he treats all the servants, and especially him, so badly. Telemachus says to Eumaeus to not get all worried about it because Antinous is just talking with his evil words. And then he says to Antinous that he ain't cool and that he isn't surprised that he wouldn't give a stranger some of his food. Odysseus approaches Antinous and says that since he is the most noble of them all, he should give him an even bigger portion. Antinous asks exactly which god sent this bum to his table, acting like he owns the place or something, and says that he should clear off before he hurts him. Odysseus then said, It seems your brain doesn't match your looks. Are you really going to be that stingy about giving up food when it isn't even yours? Antinous then hits him with a chair on his right shoulder for Odysseus being too insolent. Odysseus shrugs that off though, and he just says that I hope this guy dies alone before he can get married. Antinous says to eat or to just leave, and if he speaks up again, that he'll have his young men drag him through the house until his skin turns to ribbons. Now go and get your popcorn as I speak out a direct quote from this moment. Should be even better than my own retelling. But the rest of them were deeply shocked, and one arrogant youth would say to another, Antinous, you did wrong to strike the wretched vagrant. You're a doomed man if he turns out to be some god from heaven. And the gods do disguise themselves as strangers who are from abroad, and move from town to town in every shape, observing the deeds of the just and unjust. This quote is a direct explanation on why you should always give Xenia. However, Antinous did not care from hearing this. Penelope screams out with her maids by her side, asking that Apollo would strike them all down. That's where you would think that Apollo is the only god that actually helps out. Penelope asked for Eumaeus to go get the stranger who walked in, hoping that he would have some news of Odysseus' whereabouts, as he looks like someone who would have some good and wise tales. This ends with both Odysseus and Penelope organizing a private meeting by the fire after the sun sets. Eumaeus says to KYS to Telemachus, also known as keep yourself safe, from the suitors to be clear. Telemachus says that all is good, but to come back tomorrow morning with some good beasts for slaughter. He and the immortal gods will see to everything over here. Eumaeus then finishes up his meal and then goes on his way as the others continue to feast and dance. This is where the chapter ends. We see in our story the value of Xenia being used and abused constantly, especially when it came to poor people. They even directly quote how the gods would go to test people on their Xenia. However, it was good to see how most of the suitors did give some food to Odysseus, and that we also saw how Telemachus immediately invited Eumaeus inside and gave him something to eat. But we also saw how Antinous actively shunned Odysseus and refused to show Xenia, and how this was a big no-no. Even his own suitor companions were aghast. Now, we all know that Odysseus has a prognostic stink of arete, and Odysseus uses his arete, or his metis, to trick the suitors, and especially Antinous constantly, so that he could get food like the greedy man he is. He also uses it to concoct some great insults, and to quote the book, quick-witted Odysseus drew back and said, well, well, so you haven't the brains to match your looks. Now, let's talk about some of the highlights and lowlights from this book. Well, for highlights, Odysseus went into town. I mean, how can you not think this is the best book? Also, I did enjoy the degradation of the poor. I love the dog dying before he could see his master's face again after like 20 years. Apollo's also a great guy. Gotta love seeing that everyone is begging for him to help. Also, Antinous is just a great guy and has some very strong and good opinions. Talking about some of the lowlights, well, he did eventually have to leave town to go home. I know, try not to cry. Also, Telemachus did not have to be so mean to Antinous. He was just expressing his opinions. Eumaeus needs to try and stop being some sort of hero. I hate this Eumaeus guy. I only wish there could have been more insults throughout the course of the book, and also that the book was 5 times as long.